A former co-worker of mine shook my hand on the last day of work. He told me I was the only person who had treated him with any respect and that he would always remember me. What have you unknowingly done that meant the world to someone else? I can't imagine this meant too much to the person in question, but I always enjoy remembering this story. I was in marching band in most of high school, and when I was a sophomore a freshman named Kyle joined my section. I don't really remember us ever having any kind of meaningful interaction, but he was new to the instrument so I helped him when I could. He turned out to be the half-brother of the guy I had a crush on, but they had different last names and didn't look alike so I didn't know this at the time. At the end of that school year we started dating, and when he told me about his family I said, "Kyle's your brother? He's in my section in band." The guy replied, "I know. He told me you're the only one who's nice to him." I had no idea. Automatic approval from the parents, I would assume. Score. Working as a sandwich artist, read, underpaid Subway employee. One night when a family walks in, I give them all a big smile and start my routine. The older brother, late teens, early 20s, is special needs, don't know the PC term, sorry, and wants to order his own sub. I don't think anything of it. I start talking with him as I would anyone. Took me a bit longer to get through the order, but hey, it's the end of the night, and the kid is smiling. I've done good. I ring the family out, and they go on their way. The next night, the younger brother, probably my age at the time, came back into the restaurant. I recognized him and welcomed him back. As I'm getting ready to make his meal, he stops me with a hint of tears in his eyes and says I'm not here to order. I wanted to come back and thank you for the way you treated my brother. He likes talking to people, but mostly they just ignore him. You really made his night and I can't thank you enough for what you did. My managers and everyone else in line heard him say that. By the time he shook my hand and walked out, I'm pretty sure we all had tears in our eyes. I don't remember the last time I received a compliment like that, but I'll never forget it. TL. DR. Carried on a conversation with a special needs person. Got a heartfelt and tearful thank you the next night. Not me, but my brother Nick made a huge impact on my great uncle Earl when we were little kids. Earl, I guess, had a pretty bad stroke that had crippled half his body. He had braces on one leg and had to walk with a cane. Half his face was droopy and immobile, and after years and years of smoking his voice was really raspy, and so very deep. His speech patterns were also altered because of the fact that he could only move half his mouth. He had one hand that he couldn't really move. For whatever reason, Nick from age 3 onward thought Uncle Earl was the greatest guy ever. All the other kids, we have a huge family with 20-something grandkids, were terrified of Uncle Earl and would cry or run away from him. My brother used to laugh and run out to give him high fives. He called him Uncle Popeye Man and Earl called my brother Tiger. He'd color pictures for Earl and get Earl to play t-ball with us. As a result, Earl would always send my family special treats. I remember one Easter being kind of jealous when Nick got a 3-pound chocolate egg with the word Tiger stamped into the side. TLDR. My great uncle had a bad stroke and scared all little kids, except my brother who thought my uncle was the greatest guy ever. That's the sweetest story. Makes me feel bad for how angry and resentful I was for having to visit my great aunt Florence every summer and Christmas. I just wanted to get there. Frick those 2-day layovers. When I was young, I went to an overnight camp that I loved. We spent all our time with nearly exclusively just our little group. 5 girls or so I eventually started the only co-ed meal table because the girls were annoying me. An older girl sat with us one day at lunch, looking nervous and whatnot. She seemed sweet so a few of the kids tried talking to her, only for her to run crying from the table. I went after her, because that was the kind of nosy brat I was, and I got her to tell me what was wrong. She had severe social anxiety issues caused by her parents and bullies at school. I told her that she didn't have to be afraid of anything or anyone because she's a good person and that's all that matters. By next year, I'd completely forgotten about the girl. I arrived at camp and was hanging around, waiting to get my room key, when a pretty girl bounded up to me and gave me a huge hug. She was smiling and confident and happy and she was so excited to see me. She started thanking me and I realized it was the scared little girl I'd talked to the year before. She said I'd be the final push for her to find her confidence. Just wanted to say, Someone did something very similar for me, and I don't think they have any idea, nor would I know how to start to thank them. But it has made an incredible difference in my life since, how I feel about myself, and how I interact with other people. Major upvotes. I used to be a firefighter EMT. Took a mom and son to the hospital on backboards, due to the mom putting their escort on its side. No one was hurt, but, you know, it's protocol to board people after an inverted. Anyway, the little boy of maybe 5 years old, he's freaking out, scared out of his mind while on the backboard going to hospital. So I'm just talking with him, holding his hand, trying to keep his mind off things, explaining what's going on and all the stuff going on that he can hear but can't see. Stuff I normally do in such situations. We get to the hospital, the attendings almost immediately take them off the backboards, etc. I'm in the room, doing my paperwork, tying up loose ends, getting supplies. When I finished and bid the mom and boy goodbye, he ran up to me and asked if he could give me a hug. I kneeled down and he gave me the tightest hug anyone ever has. All for just doing my job. Brought tears to my eyes. 15 years later, I still remember Cameron and what he did. We originally had some issues with one of my employees. He was great when other people were in the store, but would basically stand around doing nothing if he was the only one in the store. Our regional manager told him that he needed to get focused or get out. I was firm in my decision that we should not fire him, although the RM wanted him gone. Our management team would not budge, knowing that if he would just get focused he'd be a great employee. Myself and the other manager talked with him, told him that he needed to keep up his numbers when he wasn't being watched, and he'd be golden in this job. He quit his second job, which he hated and was sucking the life out of him, and we gave him more hours. He immediately improved and was outselling me and the other manager in just a few weeks' time. He really appreciated having that second chance, more than we realized. He was only with our team for 6-ish months before he went off to basic training, but when he left, he wrote in his notice that we were the best managers that he'd ever had and that this was the best job he'd ever had. When I was 4, I was very sick. I was hospitalized and out of preschool for a month. It was bad, but in the end, everything was fine. Shortly after, my family moved, so I never returned to that preschool. 12 years later and I'm visiting some friends at their high school. A girl comes running up to me and goes, "Oh my god, yours post facto 1776 to my knowledge." I had never seen her before, so I simply responded, "Yeah, I'm sorry, do I know you?" She looks at me and said, "We went to preschool together. I remember when you were in the hospital, the entire class made get well soon cards." I didn't fully understand, so my parents sat me down and explained to me then what death was. "I was so scared for you that I cried for days. I'm so glad you're okay." Then she hugged me. Apparently, because I inadvertently introduced her to the concept of death and survival, it's allowed her to deal with other tragedies she came across early in life. TLDR. Inadvertently became the embodiment of death for a preschooler. That is the most metal TLDR I have ever seen. I am a school bus driver and have been for over 5 years. Every year, I usually end up with a great rapport with my kids. This year, my elementary school group, 9 and 10-year-olds, were my favorites, always telling me stuff about their day, making jokes, towing the line a little more than they ever would with other adults. I always tried to talk to them like adults when I could, and never had to write referrals for any of my kids this year. Today was the last day of school, and I had 2 of the kids' parents tell me that their children talk about me all the time, and that my friendship means a lot to them. Kids I drove when I started 5 years ago still wave at me and call me by my name, and that feels awesome. That I made a positive impact on a kid's life. I don't get paid a whole hell of a lot to do what I do, which is basically to pilot a huge, hot, 20-ton vehicle with the lives of upwards of 40 children's lives in my hands on a daily basis. But it's compliments and recognition like that that make it the best job I've ever had. Thank you, bus drivers, guys. We don't do it for the money, we do it for the kids. You could possibly be my old neighbor from the house I grew up in. Your story reminds me of him so much. He was also into woodworking and would hand make a present for each graduating student on his bus each year. I just finished talking to one of my friends online, and something wasn't right. She didn't seem her usual weird self. The feeling didn't go away through the night, and it got progressively worse. It was about 11:30 p.m. and I decided to call her, just to assure myself that everything was okay. The answer I got was her incredibly angry that I woke her up. I told her I was concerned for some reason, and she hung up on me. I felt better that she was okay, and finally slept. Fast forward 5 years, and I run into her at the shopping mall. We talked for a bit and I ended up bringing up that moment, joking that I've always been overly worried about my friends. She broke down in tears in the middle of the store and told me that she was going to kill herself that night. She was moments away from hanging herself when I called asking if she was okay. After that call, she couldn't bring herself to kill herself. She said that she's always owed her life right now to me, and that she wouldn't be alive right now if I didn't make that simple phone call. It made me realize how simple things can make a huge impact on someone's life. I'm gonna call everyone now. When I was in high school, one day, just on a lark, I walked through the hallways handing out stickers. They were those silly little 99-cent sticker packets you see at Walmart. I bought about 15 of them and just perused the halls in between classes handing them out. I walked past a girl I'd never seen before and peeled off a sticker that said "You're beautiful" and featured a chipper little flower on it with a smiley face. I walked over to her and stuck it on her shirt and "Have a great day." I took a step to walk away and she grabbed me by the back of my shirt and just started sobbing. I turned around to hug her and she just fell all to pieces in my arms. We stood there, in the hallway, embracing each other for a minute or so. She took a step back, dried her tears with the back of her sleeve, touched the sticker and croaked a feeble thank you. I saw her a few more times after that but we never spoke. It was an incredibly powerful moment between two strangers. I guess in that moment we lived an entire friendship. That was a truly beautiful and poetic way to end a heartwarming story. Thank you for being such a nice person. My story works both ways. I and someone else benefited from something. I volunteered at a senior citizens community during my freshman and sophomore years of high school. My favorite thing to have all the elderly people come to the lounge and I'd tell them about my life, whether it be school, relationship problems. They give the best relationship advice, etc. And they would tell awesome stories from their past, reliving different time periods in their lives with each other. I would just sit there and listen and have a good time. Eventually my dad got a new job in a different city, so I told them that I would be leaving soon. On the last day, they all wrote me a card and bought me a cake. Of course I teared up and so did they as well. We all said our goodbyes and they all left, but as a volunteer, I had to stay behind and clean up. One lady stayed behind, came up to me and kissed me on the cheek. She said that she was lonely after her husband passed and that her children died before any of them could get married, so she never got to have grandkids. Every time she saw me, she would think, my grandchild would have been just like him. I cried even more, hugged her, thanked her for all the experiences. Half a year later, I got an email from my volunteer coordinator. This same elderly woman was sick and dying and wished to see me. I drove the 3 hours to see her and man, we had such a fun time just chit-chatting. The coordinator emailed me later saying how wonderful it was for me to visit her and she had the biggest smile on her face after I had left until she passed. It was touching. Those 2 years volunteering there have changed my life. I've just had a better look on life, learned to embrace the elderly, they've always got the best advice, and somehow changed my view on death. I've just recently been able to accept that we all die, and not to be afraid of it. If it happens, it happens, but live life to the fullest so that one day, I can retell all of my life stories to some volunteer that hangs out with me when I'm old. I cried, man, so touching. Nothing to your scale, but while I was working as a clerk at a grocery store, I took the job very seriously. I always took an interest in everyone that came in my line and always tried to converse with them when they desired it. I hardly conversed with my coworkers since this was strongly curbed by management, which is indeed good for the customer. One day I finished with a customer and as she leaves she looks me in the eye and says, "Every time I come in here you are so helpful and kind." And that means a lot to me. Onions. Onions everywhere. TL. DR. Old lady thanked me for being a good check stand operator. I got the same way with a lady. She was 40 and had a lot of problems with diabetes, and her bones were brittle, so she was in and out of surgery. We'd always talk when she came in and I'd shop with her to get things off the high shelf. She just passed away last month. I went to a pretty conservative college and felt very out of place there. As a result, I ended up befriending one of the gardeners that worked there. We'd smoke spliffs and he'd make me tea in their break room so I didn't have to pay for it. He loved my pet ferrets, and I even brought them over to his place when I visited. He was a rough around the edges kind of guy, had lots of dodgy prison tattoos from his time inside, came from a very deprived area of the city, had a drug addicted ex who he would throw drugs to inside and orange over the wall of the prison she was in. He was really turning his life around, though. He had an apartment he got from the council for almost nothing, and was really house proud. He had me over for dinner once and his apartment was beautiful and nicely decorated. We were pretty different people, and his world was so out of my personal sphere of experience, but he was a lovely person and we always had great crack together chatting and smoking. After I left college we lost touch. I tried calling and texting him a few times, and even gave my number to one of the other gardeners to pass on to him, but never heard back. A few weeks ago, well over a year since we had last seen each other, the secretary of my college called to tell me that he was dead. The reason I hadn't heard from him was because his abusive junkie ex got out of prison and they got back together. She would take his phone and wallet so he couldn't do anything without her permission. And when he got ill and she didn't think he should go to the doctor, he didn't go. The police and his landlord eventually broke into his place with his brother and convinced him to go into hospital, but he died. Apparently at his wake, where the other gardeners from the college were in attendance, his family approached them to ask about a girl he had been friends with that he spoke really highly of. They said they didn't know her name, but that she was a student in the college and kept ferrets. The college figured out who they meant and called me. I went to his cremation the next day, and his family were delighted to see me and welcomed me as one of their own. I realized when I arrived that there were only about 20 people present. I hadn't realized that his life was so lonely, or that his ex was abusive until I spoke to his brother and asked about her, since I only ever heard about her from him. I also hadn't realized he thought so highly of me, either, or that he'd ever have cause to talk about me with anybody else. It makes me so sad to think about. Despite the sadness of his death, I'm happy you were able to get to know and influence a man to the degree that he felt it necessary to tell his family how good of a person you are. That is a truly meaningful statement that you should carry with you in the future, because it is beautiful and amazing thing to make that sort of difference in a person's life. Showing my age here. While in my senior year of high school, several families adopted so-called Vietnamese boat children. They were all in their late teens. 14-year-old. One had apparently already graduated in Vietnam, but his papers were stolen by pirates as he voyaged to freedom. He had to retake his senior year of HS to get readmitted to college. One of the smartest guys I ever met. Two other boys arrived and had 4th and 8th grade educations in Vietnam. For both boys, I was asked to use my study hall period to help the boys with English language. So, I started with picture books and we spent a year learning English, and for me, very little Vietnamese. As we learned, I would take the boys out to stores, parks, churches, etc. just so they could associate nouns and verbs to real activities. It seemed to work well. I learned later that the boy with a 4th grade education struggled a bit because his age and education created a disconnect that was tough to deal with on a daily basis. He did adjust in time. 2 years after my graduation, I was back in town to see one of my good friends graduate. After the graduation ceremony, as pictures were being taken and tears were being shed, I heard a voice saying, "He's here, Mom and Dad. He's here." I was yanked around for a photo with the other boat kid who had managed to graduate that year and was headed off to college. He spent quite some time regaling his parents and my friend, and her parents, with the stories of our year and how I had taught him English. Until then, I really didn't realize what an impact that I'd had on him. Yes, it felt good. Walked into a Target and bought some typical stuff for home. When I got to the register, the girl at the register looked so tired and sad. I just looked at her, and before she could ask me first, I said a simple "Hi there, how is your day going?" She almost started crying. She then said, "You're the first person who has even spoken to me today. Thank you so much for being so kind. You've made my work day. Always treat people in the service industry well. They get too much crap from everyone and don't deserve it. They're people too." In middle school there was a kid who was found out to have a misshaped penis. He got an erection in the shower after gym class and someone noticed him trying to hide it in the corner. So this person was telling us all afterwards. After hearing his description I said, "Oh, so it looks like a boot, innocent enough question." I swear to God my high school people didn't even know his real first name. Everyone called him Boot. What a horrible nickname. Boot. The kid's entire being was discounted because he had a crooked penis. No one took him seriously. No one cared what he had to say, his talents. His mind meant nothing. He was just a walking punchline. People are cruel. I felt terrible for a long time because, well, down there somewhere I think I really do have a conscience. I had no idea what the consequences of my little nickname would be. So one night in college, after an afternoon night of passionate drinking, I hopped on MSN Messenger to chat and saw he was on. I wrote this giant apology letter. Poured my heart out. Basically, I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry I started it. I feel like a piece of crap. God, I was a piece of crap during puberty. It had been nagging me for a while that I needed to make amends with this guy. No response. Finally, a couple nights later I log into my computer and he's written just a few sentences. I can't tell you what that means to me. I know you probably did it for your own closure, but now I've got mine, too. I haven't really spoken to anyone about all that stuff. I was in a very dark place through those years, and though I was given a new opportunity to start fresh in college, it's been tough, as you can imagine. We were young, and young people do some terrible things without understanding why they are terrible. All the best. That guy's maturity was light years ahead of mine, or any of ours, for that matter. I feel like I did a small good deed by trying to make amends, but he reciprocated an even better one. He gave me a whole new perspective on crappy people. So, Boot, if you're out there, thanks man. If it bends upwards, he can probably stimulate the G-spot better. So there's that. Back in the 80s I recommended a new hire to our firm and he was hired. The dude had his first child on the way and had fallen on hard times. Being new to this very specific type of work, he made many rookie mistakes and the company decided he must go. I defended him high and low, full well knowing all he needed was some extended mentoring, but he was let go anyway. My actions on his behalf had the firm opining that I might follow, so I left theme and created my own firm, creating and enlisting many new contracts. I had been with the previous firm for 15 years already, so I rehired the fella and he became my top employee. I eventually splintered off from my original firm, leaving him with contracts I chose to no longer manage, and he excels to this day, with many satisfied clients. Over the years I moved some distance away and we lost contact. 8 years later he locates me and he and his wife ask me to be their third child's godfather. I was so very humbled and proud to grant their request. I attended the christening only to discover they had given the child my first and second names. TL. Dr. A wise business decision gained me a godson and family status. I imagine that must be an amazing feeling. It's one thing to save a man, but it's another for him to appreciate it enough to name his progeny after you. I think someone else has something similar, but this one's my story. I didn't realize it had happened at the time, and only found out a year or so later when the friend in question got too drunk and blurted it out to me. Basically my best friend and I hadn't talked for a few days and I just had a nagging feeling about her. I wish I could describe it, but this is a strange feeling I've only ever felt with this one person. So I grabbed my phone, dial her number, say frick it, and then hang up. Repeat. Third time around I let it ring, and she answers. For some reason I still don't fathom, instead of a hello or anything I say, well, if it isn't my favorite person in the world. We chatted about mundane things for a few minutes and I just ended it with love you retard. Politically incorrect maybe, but that's what I said. A year later she tells me that she was going to jump out her balcony that night and I had saved her life. Scared the living crap out of me, but I am glad I made that call. 00. I could make this really long and drawn out, but the long TL, DR, would be, I'm really good at my job in an incredibly high-paced, aggressive, somewhat terrifying kitchen. A few years back, a guy who had no faith in his abilities, which were quite good for a green cook, was failing left and right because other cooks were bullying up on him. That's par for the course when people are blowing it. Apparently my habit of him falling slightly behind on my side and me just saying "I've got you, baby, you're fine, I've got you, just breathe" a few times gave him the confidence to keep up with the job and the business. He's a pretty well paid sous chef elsewhere now, and a few months ago he said that he had a pantry guy perpetually in the weeds. Really behind, I guess. Hard to describe to non-cooks. And he found himself saying, "I've got you, baby, I've got you, just breathe." He thanked me for showing him how to effectively lead and take care of his employees without holding their hands or doing their jobs for them. TLDR. To the TLDR. Being nice to a struggling co-worker apparently led to him being really good to his employees down the road and decently successful, instead of him becoming just another burnt out cook in the weeds, trying to do more work than you have time and finding a way to not quit until it is all over. A true test of someone's character. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.